Jack McAllister had lived alone on the vast plains of the Wild West for many years. His ranch, a simple structure made of weathered wood and surrounded by miles of untouched land, was both his home and his prison. He had chosen this life many years ago, turning his back on the bustling towns filled with people, preferring instead the quiet of the open land. The only sounds that ever broke the silence were the wind whistling across the prairie, the lowing of cattle, and the occasional neigh of his horse. Most people didn't understand why Jack lived this way. In a world where community was everything, where neighbors were close enough to help with the harvest or share a meal, Jack was different. He had no family left. The people he had once known, friends, neighbors, even old lovers, had either moved on or, like his parents, passed away. He was all alone in the world. He spent his days working the land. His routine was simple. He woke up with the sun, fed the cattle, fixed fences, and checked the crops. Everything on the ranch was up to him, and Jack didn't mind. He was used to it. It was a life of solitude, but it was all he knew. His ranch had become a place of quiet reflection, where Jack could think about his past. There was no one to talk to, no one to ask about his day or offer their thoughts. The silence became his companion, and over the years he had grown accustomed to it. Yet no matter how much time passed, Jack couldn't escape the feeling that something was missing. He had spent years working hard to build a life for himself, but in doing so he had cut himself off from the rest of the world. He had become a man of the land, but the land had its own way of reminding him of what he lacked: connection. There were days when he would sit alone by his fire at night, staring into the flames, and wonder if this was all life had to offer. He thought back to the days when he was younger. He had once been part of a small community, surrounded by friends and family. Life had been full of laughter, love, and the shared struggles of everyday life. But time, as it always does, had a way of taking things away. His parents had died when he was still a young man, and shortly after that, the community around him began to break apart. People moved on, chasing better opportunities or simply seeking something more than the quiet life of the plains. Jack had stayed behind, not out of choice, but because he didn't know where else to go. The land was familiar, and it offered him a sense of purpose. But with each passing year, that purpose began to feel hollow. The silence which once comforted him had started to feel oppressive. At times Jack would feel a deep yearning in his chest, a desire for something more. He had no family, no friends, and no one to share his thoughts or dreams with. He wondered if he would die alone on this land, a forgotten man in the middle of nowhere. One morning, as Jack was riding out to check the herd, he noticed something strange on the horizon. A group of riders, about 4 or 5 of them, were moving across the plain. They were Apache. Jack could tell from the way they rode and the colors of their blankets. He had lived long enough in the West to know the signs of various tribes, and the Apache were known to roam the area. But there was something odd about this group. They were not moving in the usual fashion. They were slower, more deliberate, almost as if they were carrying something. Jack's curiosity got the better of him, and he spurred his horse forward, deciding to get a closer look. As he approached, he could see that the Apache were carrying a young girl, no older than 16 or 17. Her hands were tied, and her face was covered in dirt and blood. She looked weak, her body barely able to support her as she was dragged along by the group. Jack's heart sank as he realized what was happening. The Apache were abandoning her. He had seen it before: tribal justice. The Apache had their ways, and when a member of their tribe was deemed unworthy or had committed a grave offense, they were often left behind to die. Jack had heard stories of this practice, but seeing it with his own eyes was something else. He knew that the girl had been sentenced to death. Jack's first instinct was to ride in and help her, but he hesitated. The Apache were a proud people, and getting involved in their affairs could be dangerous. He didn't know what crime the girl had committed, or if it was even his place to intervene. But as he watched the Apache riders disappear over the ridge, leaving the girl behind to perish in the desert heat, he knew he couldn't just ride away. The girl's lifeless body was barely hanging on, and she was all alone in the vast desert. Jack couldn't let her die. His conscience wouldn't allow it. Despite the risk, despite the unknowns, he made up his mind. He would save her. Jack rode back to the ranch, his mind racing. He quickly packed a few supplies, enough to survive a couple of days in the desert. He wasn't sure if he would find the girl alive, but he knew he had to try. He grabbed his rifle and his knife and mounted his horse, setting out toward the desert where he had last seen the Apache riders. The sun was already high in the sky, and the heat was unbearable. Jack knew it would be a long, hard journey, but he couldn't shake the image of the girl's desperate face from his mind. She had been abandoned by her own people, left to die. Jack couldn't let that happen. The desert stretched out before him, a vast and unforgiving landscape. The wind whipped across the plain, stirring up dust and dirt, making it harder to see. Jack's horse trotted steadily, its hooves kicking up the dry earth. The sun beat down relentlessly, but Jack pushed on. His thoughts were consumed by the girl, by what had happened to her, and by what he could do to help. Hours passed, and Jack's hope began to waver. The desert seemed endless, and he began to wonder if he had made a mistake. But then, as the sun began to dip lower in the sky, he spotted something in the distance. Movement. There, barely visible against the backdrop of the setting sun, was the girl. She was sitting in the dirt, her back against a rock, her eyes closed. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He had found her. He rode up to her quickly, dismounting in one smooth motion. Her face was pale and she looked barely alive. She had been through too much, and Jack knew he had to act fast. "Miss," he called gently, kneeling beside her. "Are you all right?" The girl opened her eyes, her gaze confused and weak. She flinched at the sight of Jack, but he could see the faintest glimmer of recognition in her eyes. He gently placed his hand on her shoulder, careful not to startle her too much. "I'm here to help," Jack said softly. "I won't hurt you." The girl didn't respond, but Jack could see the faintest nod as she leaned into him for support. He knew it was a sign she had accepted his help, and that was enough. Jack helped her onto his horse, and together they made their way back to the ranch. The journey was slow, the desert unforgiving, but Jack's determination never wavered. He couldn't leave her out there to die, and though neither of them spoke a word during the ride, Jack knew something had changed in him. This girl, whom he had never met, had already begun to fill the emptiness he had carried for so long. They were headed toward a future neither of them could have predicted, and neither of them could have imagined what this unexpected rescue would lead to. The journey back to Jack's ranch was long and tiring, the scorching sun hanging low in the sky. Jack had ridden through many deserts before, but this was different. He was not alone. The young Apache girl, whom he had rescued from certain death, sat behind him, holding on to him for support as they made their way through the rugged terrain. Jack kept his eyes fixed on the horizon, his mind racing with thoughts of what would come next. He didn't know much about her, her past, her tribe, or what had led to her abandonment, but he knew one thing for sure. She had no one now but him. They arrived at the ranch just as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the land. Jack led the horse into the small stable, dismounting and then helping the girl down. She seemed too weak to stand on her own, so he gently supported her as they walked toward the main house. Her body was frail and her steps were shaky, but she was alive. That was all that mattered. Once inside, Jack settled her onto a cot by the fire, the warmth of the flames offering a sense of comfort after the harsh desert cold. He fetched a basin of water and gently wiped her face, washing away the dirt and sweat from the long journey. She didn't resist, her eyes closed as if she were too tired to care. Jack didn't push her to talk, understanding that she had been through too much. He knew it would take time to earn her trust, but he was willing to wait. For the first few days, the girl remained silent, barely eating or drinking. Jack didn't force her to do anything. He simply stayed close by, offering food, water, and quiet company. He knew her silence was a shield, a way to protect herself from the pain of her past. The way she looked at him, eyes filled with wariness, spoke volumes. Jack had seen that look before, in the eyes of animals that had been mistreated. He didn't know what had happened to her, but he knew she had suffered deeply. Over time, the girl began to recover, but her emotional scars were harder to heal. Jack would often catch her staring out at the open plains, her thoughts distant. He knew she was thinking about her tribe, about what they had done to her. There was no way she could simply forget the pain of being abandoned by her own people. Jack couldn't imagine what that must have felt like, being cast aside by the very ones who were supposed to care for you. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the stars began to appear in the sky, Jack sat down beside her by the fire. He didn't speak at first, unsure of what to say. Words seemed so small compared to the silence between them, but then to his surprise she spoke. "I am Ayana. she said softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. Jack turned to her, surprised. It was the first time she had spoken since he had brought her back to the ranch. Her voice was faint, but there was something in it. Something that told Jack she was starting to trust him. "I'm Jack," he replied simply. "I'm glad you're safe." Ayanna nodded slowly, her eyes gazing into the flames. "I was left behind," she said, her voice trembling. "My tribe, they decided I was no longer worthy to live." Her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and anger, and Jack could see the pain in her words. Jack didn't know what to say. He had never been a man of many words, but he knew that right now she didn't need explanations or empty promises. She needed understanding, so he sat there quietly, letting her speak if she wanted to. "I was supposed to die," she continued, her voice shaking. "But you saved me." She paused, the words heavy with meaning. "Why?" Jack felt a lump form in his throat. He had never thought of himself as a hero. He was just a rancher doing what he thought was right. But hearing Ayanna's words made him realize that sometimes the smallest act of kindness could change the course of someone's life. "I couldn't leave you out there," Jack said softly, his voice steady but filled with emotion. "No one deserves to be left to die. You didn't deserve that." Ayanna looked at him, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "But I was nothing to you. You didn't know me. Why would you risk your life for me?" Jack smiled gently, though there was no amusement in it, only quiet understanding. "Maybe because I know what it's like to be alone," he said. "I've lived on this land for years, but there's always been something missing. I guess it's you." "You don't need to explain. I just knew I had to help." Ayanna said nothing for a moment, the crackling of the fire the only sound between them. Jack could see that her guard was slowly starting to come down. She was still wary, still holding on to her past, but the bond between them was beginning to form, slowly, but surely. In the following weeks, Jack and Ayanna spent more time together. She began to help with small tasks around the ranch, though at first she was hesitant. The ranch was a world so different from the one she had known, and everything seemed strange to her. But Jack was patient. He taught her how to tend to the cattle, how to ride a horse, and how to fix fences. He showed her the beauty of the land, the wildflowers that bloomed in spring, the way the sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and purple, and the peaceful quiet of the night sky. Ayanna started to find comfort in the rhythm of life at the ranch. She was no longer the scared girl she had been when Jack first found her. She was slowly starting to trust him, and through that trust, Jack found something he hadn't realized he needed: a purpose. He had always thought of himself as a solitary man, but now, with Ayanna by his side, he realized that he didn't have to face the world alone anymore. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, Ayanna finally spoke again. "I never thought I would find peace," she said, her voice softer than usual. "But I think I am starting to." Jack smiled. "It's not much, but it's home." Ayanna looked at him, her expression filled with gratitude. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel abandoned. She didn't feel alone. She felt safe. And for Jack, that was enough. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks turned into months. Their lives slowly began to intertwine, and the loneliness Jack had felt for so long started to fade. Ayanna, once a girl abandoned by her own people, had become more than just a companion to him. She had become his family, and though neither of them spoke the words, both knew that their bond had grown stronger than either had imagined. They were no longer two strangers, each with their own pain, but two souls who had found a way to heal together. They had built a life from the ashes of their pasts, and in the quiet of the ranch they had found something they had both been searching for: a place to belong.